After a wonderful time in Great Sand Dunes National Park, we headed to Mesa Verde, a place full of beautiful wilderness and incredible indigenous history. At the park, we were greeted with a spectacular view set against a vibrant dusk sky. The fresh desert air was rejuvenating after the long drive. Not long after, we arrived at Farview Lodge, set atop one of the mesas within the park. Casey and I went to our room, where we found goodie bags left by the lodge and Aramark. The rooms didn't have any TVs and cellular service here was spotty at best. And that's exactly how it should be. If you want to see a spectacle, turn off your electronics and check out the stars on the back porch. At dinner time, we met Tori and Jin, who were visiting from Colombia, the sportswear company, not the country. And Mark gave a retelling of our time at the stargazing program the night before.
Our laser pointer goes up, and everyone finally goes, "Whoa!" Not to the Milky Way, but to the laser pointer.
Dinner at the lodge restaurant, called the Metate Room, was incredible. It started with some flatbread and cocktails with orange zest and Italian bitters. And then came the delicious food. The special today was tortilla-crusted chicken, but I opted for the duck instead. Delicious food, wonderful wine, and great company. Man, we were being spoiled. But the best thing that topped off the night was the lodge's view. From just about anywhere, you could see the Milky Way drifting by in a celestial sea above. I took advantage of the quiet morning to think back on the trip so far, and all the fantastic conversations I'd been part of. It's nice to finally have some time to sit down and reflect and talk. I was thinking about the talk yesterday. I was just moved to tears, and I don't know if it's because, well, obviously the story is sad about Hiroshima and the internment camps, but I think I was also moved because it was nice to just hear a voice from someone who looks like me, even if they're not Chinese. When you think of like outdoor things, you don't think of people who are Asian necessarily, or any sort of person of color. And it was just really refreshing to hear that conversation happening with actual park officials. But I do get this impression sometimes where it's like, I wonder if people are surprised that I'm there. I think a lot of times people see me and they're like, they do not expect me to have any sort of wilderness skills or anything like that. I will say it is a beautiful, beautiful morning. We are being really pampered. We're at this lodge which is run by Aramark. Is that how you say it? Feeding me a lot of food. Feeding all of us a lot of food. But today we're going to Mesa Verde, gonna climb some ladders, gonna try to work out how to do that with this tripod. Been a fun time though, talking with everybody. Philosophy, man. All about that philosophy.
Yeah, like portraits. Yeah.
Breakfast at the lodge was fantastic, but you had to be careful not to stuff yourself before a day of hiking. Afterwards, we made our way to the Mesa Verde Visitor Center, a building that's designed to be unimposing, but is far from unimpressive. Inside, we met Cliff Spencer, the superintendent of this park. He talked with us about the importance of making parks more inclusive of different cultures, and how even small things like allowing visitors to move picnic tables around to accommodate bigger families could help do that. Did your name have anything to do with coming here?
You're not the first person. Believe it or not. My mom wasn't a fortune teller. She didn't know that I'd have this job. So no is the short answer.
Later, an interpretive ranger showed us around the visitor center. The statue at the front, called the Ancient Ones, is a striking work of art that greets all visitors, and all around the building are native desert plants. This sculpture, called In the Moment, was created by Joe Cajera Jr., an indigenous artist, and it depicts a storyteller. And there were also other fantastic works of art done by indigenous people, local to the region. The visitor center also had detailed dioramas that gave a glimpse into what the ancestral people's daily lives might have looked like. Then Tara, the curator of the collections here, gave us a wonderful tour of some of the archives, where we saw old park records and shelves full of ancient pottery. These striking ceramic masterpieces with their intricate hand-painted patterns and dimpled textures are more than just beautiful works of art. They're a portal to people in the past. We had a quick lunch, and then we headed to the Cliff Palace, the largest and most iconic cliff dwellings in America. The surrealism of the dwelling, which almost looks like a relief carving chiseled out of the cliffs, accentuated the majesty of this western desert landscape. And then, Ranger Scott led us down to the actual palace. We were grateful to be able to get this up-close look at the structures below. The hike itself was brief, but it was exciting getting to move the legs and breathe some fresh air. And then we saw the palace itself. Part of its beauty is its almost modernist look, with the geometric patterns and monochrome earthy coloring. But evidence shows that these rooms and towers actually used to be fully covered in plaster with vibrant red or yellow or white coloring. We also saw some kivas, gathering spaces used largely for ceremonial purposes. There were also cramped tunnels to get from one room to the other, and remnants of multi-story rooms that looked like lone towers after the structures around them eroded away. And there were strange structures built high up atop a small and cramped rock shelf with loose rocky walls that lacked mortar. These could have acted as storage spaces with haphazardly built walls, but they might have also been a sort of Stone Age panic room. The hallways in the Cliff Palace all converge beneath the loose rocks, suggesting residents might hide up in the room and push rocks out onto any intruders in an emergency scenario. After the hike, we went to an overlook to look at the cliff dwellings that dotted the walls of the gorge before heading back to the lodge.
Look at the cliff dwellings! There are more cliff dwellings, so many! Oh.
Today was a pretty incredible day. We went to the visitor center and we got treated to this sort of exclusive look at the archive of all the artifacts that they have. And a lot of it was pottery. It was incredible to see these intricate painted black and white pots and seeing all the patterns on there. And you look closely and you see these like slight flaws, where the brush would spread out a little bit and the stroke isn't uniform. You think about how this was painted by hand by a living human being hundreds of years ago. They had these cooking pots that were a lot bigger. They would pinch it and sort of create these dimples or indentations all around it. You look at these indentations and you can tell that they were pressing it in with their fingers, and sometimes apparently you even find fingerprints. And just to be able to see this and imagine someone actually working on it, sitting there with clay. And that sort of connection is amazing because it's like a time machine. Because you would think about them running into problems and trying to work around those problems, or maybe an artist who's painting a pot thinking about what he wants to put on it, and it's just so cool. Beneath one of the lodge buildings, I spotted a yucca plant that had had a few of its sharp leaves kicked over or broken off. I figured I'd use these to try and connect myself a bit more with the past. Okay, I found this old branch of yucca, I think. I wanted to attempt to make some string from it. And the first thing I'm gonna do is just smash it against this rock. After you've mashed it up, you've got all these fibers that you can sort of pull apart. They're pretty strong. So I'm just gonna separate these out and start spinning them into a sort of a rope. I'm doing a bit of a rush job, but once you've got some decent strands, you can start twisting it, and you take it and you twist it in opposite directions until it forms this little kink or loop. And then you take these two resulting strands and spin them in the same direction. And when you twist these strands in the same direction, it will want to wrap around itself. When you're getting close to the end of a strand, you want to add more in to increase the length, and also you want even thickness so that the plant wraps evenly around itself. After that bit of fun, it was time for dinner. And Casey, the resident desert plant aficionado, shared some knowledge about yucca.
So there's lots of different yucca, and there's a bunch out here. They tend to look like tall, spiky things exploding out of the ground. Joshua tree is a yucca, has another national park, one of my favorites. All yucca are part of the asparagus family, or related to asparagus. Out in Southern California, we have ones called Spanish bayonets that are really, really sharp. My friends describe them as stabby little hole plants.
And Melly was kind enough to pretend to be impressed by the rope I twisted together.
Wow, this is really strong.
The wine was already flowing before our orders of food were taken.
It's a good winter.
I'm not usually a big wine drinker, but this stuff was great.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Don't drink alone.
Then came the appetizers and prickly pear margaritas.
Cheers.
Cheers. That is pretty damn good.
That's a good margarita.
And then Jin started talking to Vic and I about Chinese customs and culture.
结婚了没？
没有。
还没有。Marry yet? I mean, being a little bit senior, I have the right to ask them. You marry? How much money you make? What do you do? How come you don't get married? 为什么？不知道。He doesn't know. 你有个女朋友，那不错哦。He has a girlfriend. I say that's not bad. Sorry. So when I go back home, I'll go after those kids. How's school? You doing good? Yeah, totally, yeah. What college did you go? Why not a doctor? Why not a lawyer? Why not an engineer? Photographer? Come on.
Dinner was a platter of various meats, including elk, I think, and we had a chocolatey drink with rum to top things off.
It's got like fall spices.
It's like chocolate, hot chocolate with alcohol.
Yeah, it has like a chocolatey flavor to it. Yeah.
It tastes like autumn.
Yeah, it's a very autumnal beverage. Yeah.
After that, they brought out this dessert. Not quite sure what it's called, but it looks like a cannoli except fancier.
Can I take a photo of it?
Sure. Giant on your fingers.
Yeah.
Little tiny
So-
hands, and I have to.
It's pretty good.
It's like an empty cellar or something.
Good.
Tell them about being first. Tell them about being first. Why you gotta be first, Vic? Why you gotta be first? Why you gotta be first, Vic?
Because I'm used to it.
I loved all the lively chatter and conversation. After all that, only the serene and silent emptiness of the night sky could lull me into such a deep sleep. The next morning, we attended a fascinating talk about fire conservation. Unfortunately, a lot of the footage I took mysteriously got deleted. Shout out to Melly for these pictures. During the talk, Assistant Fire Management Officer Keith showed us his backpack, which was full of survival gear like a Mylar blanket, flare gun, shelter, extra water, and other things. It's basically a firefighting bug-out bag. He also showed us some of the hefty tools used in the field. And, according to him, they sometimes have to do controlled burns at night when it's cooler and damper out. This involves riding on the back of some awesome ATVs with what's essentially a flamethrower. Don't try that at home, kids.
Talk about parks while you're doing it.
So this little guy here is called Mormon tea. As the Mormons were getting chased out of every city and town on the East Coast, one of their religious tenets is they are not allowed to drink caffeine. As they made it out here into the Colorado Plateau on their way out to Utah, they found that if you chew on or boil or maybe steep this in water, you can make a tea and you get a little boost of energy because it's basically ephedrine. So it's the same thing in like diet pills and all that sort of stuff. Antihistamines have it sometimes too. I have not had this. I've heard that it tastes like feet, so I probably will not ever be having this. But if you need to pick me up, you can boil up this probably smelly and disgusting plant and drink that instead.
Thankfully, for lunch, we were served food that didn't smell like feet. After that, it was on to what would be one of my favorite programs, the hike at Balcony House. I looked out at some of the juniper trees with their powdery blue cones, and this terrace was made of cedar wood and bark, just as they were used in the cliff dwellings. Volunteer Ranger Tom and Ranger Beth would be guiding us on this hike. They showed us some old, small cobs of corn and a small piece of yucca rope. And then it was down into the canyon for the actual hike. We stopped at an alcove where water was trickling through the cracks. Water was pretty scarce back then, too. The ancestral Pueblan people would carve depressions into the ground to gather the water, and then collect it with ceramic ladles. One of the first things you see on this tour is a 30-foot ladder. And yes, you have to climb it if you want to go through the whole thing. After climbing up, you squeeze through a little opening and emerge out into this beautiful and spacious plaza. The size of the plaza suggested it was a social space, maybe where parents and their kids would socialize and play, or maybe an area where people would gossip and flirt with each other. From here you could also see the namesake of Balcony House, small balconies supported by cedar wood, which, amazingly, is all original thanks to the wood's resin. To get into the next area, you have to climb up a few handholds carved by the original inhabitants, then squeeze through another corridor. The next area is a bit smaller, though with just as good a view. There are more kivas, which have a central fire pit and a small hole called a sipapu, which you can barely see at the bottom of the screen. It represents a portal that the first people came from. The top of the cave was covered in black soot from years of burning fires. And then there were grinding stones, called matates, the namesake of the lodge restaurant. Finally, at the end of the tour, you have to crawl through a tiny space, just a bit wider than a ranger's hat.
You can actually stand in this middle part.
This was a fantastic guided hike. It was exciting to crawl and climb through the balcony house. It makes the history of the place so tangible and visceral. If you want to go on it, just make sure you practice crawling around at the visitor center. Once you climb that first ladder, there's no turning back.
Here at this park, we've got people, all kinds of backgrounds, archaeologists. My background is mostly as a naturalist, and we have people from all over the country as well. So we get people from all kinds of backgrounds.
To cap off the day, Superintendent Cliff Spencer once again greeted us with his presence. He would be guiding us along the Petroglyph hiking trail. This 3-mile loop can be surprisingly strenuous, but the scenery and the petroglyphs are more than worth it. Along the hike, Superintendent Cliff stopped to talk about some plants, like the Mormon tea we saw earlier. The trail passed by another cliff dwelling called the Spruce House, and here, Cliff told some stories about his past work at the parks, including one involving a renegade raccoon that had taken up residence in a bar. This hike was a bit more what I was used to, a narrow, rugged dirt path surrounded by wilderness. All of the cliffs and rock shelters and caves reminded me a bit of home, but on a much grander scale. The trip had been amazing so far. There were so many conversations and so many adventures, and I knew I'd enjoy whatever we had ahead of us. But for now, I wanted to slow down a bit and take in the wilderness. It's hard not to be moved by the beauty of the wild, but it's not just about pretty sights and scenic views. I've always loved the wilderness because of how it shapes me and the things I learn about myself. But we also shape the parks. The stories they tell and what they become and the meaning they hold. What would our parks be without the many stories of laborers and immigrants who found respite and community in the lush greenery or open expanses of the landscape? How much less meaningful would our parks be if their original indigenous inhabitants didn't struggle to make themselves and the role that they play in the landscape known? Maybe an integral part in making the parks truly a place for everybody is for people of different backgrounds to reclaim the parks as something belonging to all of us. If you don't feel like a park is telling the full story, go there and share your story. Be a reminder to the nation that the parks are as much yours as they are anybody else's. Of course, there's more to it than that. There are more tangible changes that we can make to help people get to the parks. That's what I'd be thinking about in the final 2 nights of the Find Your Park expedition.